Hello and welcome to the Matt's Movie Reviews podcast. I am your host, Matthew Pejkovic, and this is episode number 671. Releasing June 26 in select theaters in the US and June 30 on digital and on demand is The Get Out, a crime thriller that stars Russell Crowe as a nightclub manager whose attempt to retire brings out all manner of criminal who want their pound of flesh. Also starring Teresa Palmer, Aaron Paul, and Luke Evans. The Get Out is an engrossing LA-based neo-noir filled with memorable characters navigating a web of greed and corruption in the city of angels. And joining me now to talk to all things to Get Out is the film's director and screenwriter, Derrick Borte. Derrick, how are you today?
Fantastic, Matt. Thanks for having me. Episode 671, huh?
Yes, sir. 671. 20 years
Amazing.
this year. 20 years this year I've been doing this beat. So yeah,
Wow.
yeah,
Impressive.
lots of movies watched, lots of great filmmakers to talk to, much like yourself. I got to say, to Get Out, a really interesting film in regards to based on this novel by Thomas Perry, The Strip. When you get the call from Russell Crowe, who you worked with before on Unhinged, which is a totally different film in tone and style and so many other things, and you talk about this film, a neo-noir, kind of like a crime comedy in many ways, dark comedy. What's your first kind of interpretation of the material? Was it an idea to always want to do something more comedic with Russell? Because I've read before that you talked about his personality and very much off screen is very much different than he's on screen. The intensity that he brings is much more kind of like affable, kind of like personal driven kind of guy in real life than he is with some of the characters he's portrayed.
Yeah, I mean, getting to know him off screen, off camera with Unhinged, obviously very intense character when the camera's rolling, but not like that at all when there's no camera rolling and there was a side of him that I just thought, wow, I want to see more of that, and I thought about the nice guys and thought, this is a side of himself that we haven't seen enough of.
Hmm.
We've seen a little bit of it, from Shane Black a while back. It's been quite a while now. And we weren't specifically looking for something that he could showcase that side of himself in. But when this came up, it just seemed like a perfect opportunity.
You adapt the book with Derek Fort, who you worked with before. You guys have worked on writing movies beforehand. When it comes to adapting a novel, what kind of philosophies, processes do you have in taking the story from one medium to a totally different one? Because, a story can work in a literal form in a very different way that it can on the screen. So I'm just really curious about what kind of methods do you undertake in adapting a book like this?
Yeah, I mean, you're right about that. I think that it's depending on the novel, it could be, very uh different process. But I think for us, it was really for Danny and I, it was about this character and these his predicament of forced reinvention, where the world that he's sort of been living in and towards this dream of his has sort of passed him by in a way, much like the story of the bear,
Hmm.
in the zoo there with the statue when he says that, the bears used to rule LA and then the gold rush came and men came and the bears were sort of forced out. Um, that was the center of this story, and there were all these other characters whose stories were kind of connecting with Manco, kind of not, and we really set out to set up the collision of all these stories by the end of the film. So they were more connected than they were in the book. So we took some liberties there, and I think, specific to this book and this script, it really was just about how do we take a Joe Carver character who's kind of a red herring in the book and connect him a little bit more to to the finale of this movie and the connection between Joe Carver and Slosser the dirty cop and Jeff the college professor. We sort of linked all of these together in a way that I felt like gave it more momentum. It gave it more propulsion towards this, like I said, this cataclysmic collision that inevitably is going to happen in the third act of the film.
I do find it always funny when you get an old school guy like Manco in this movie trying to do something like guided meditation. Um, because I can foresee it in many ways because my father came to Australia from Croatia in 1969, old school guy himself, and I can't see myself recommending a meditation app towards him as well because he would just ask the question like, why am I doing this? Well, what's going on here? I got better things to do in my
Yeah.
time, kind of thing. But with the story about Manco is that when he starts off the movie, he finds himself in a predicament, right? He has to change this unsustainable life, and I guess he has to try something to try to move on with his life and try to make the rest of his life a little more healthy, including trying fruit once in a while, which is a little bit of a little bit of a apparition towards the people who work for him.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think that he look the grounding force in his life is Sonny, Teresa Palmer's character, who
Yeah.
really she desperately wants him to be able to move on to whatever this next phase is, and with his health and with her. And I think that based on what happens in the beginning and his sort of new edict that he's got to kind of de-stress a little bit, get a little healthy, whatever, in terms of trying to make sure he can be there going forward. She applies some of her Zen practices and guided meditations and things like that to him, and he is a little resistant, and then the situation around him starts he gets robbed and some other things happen that sort of also take away from the ability to de-stress that he's trying to work on as well. So the situation does provide for some comedy there.
The Matt's Movie Reviews podcast is brought to you by TeePublic. TeePublic is the world's largest marketplace for independent creators to sell their work on the highest quality merchandise. With over 1.2 million designs, TeePublic is sure to have something you will love.
Setting is a big part of the Get Out. I mean, it is a LA based kind of story. What was your first reaction to the news that Gold Coast was going to be the setting for what is Los Angeles, especially but specific part of Los Angeles, right? Koreatown is what you guys are really focused on, kind of like bringing to life, on the sunny shores of Gold Coast. When was it that you first heard of that? Um, and when you are, what's kind of like your approach to what type of Los Angeles you wanted to bring to life? Is Koreatown something that's pivotal in the novel as it is in the movie, or do you kind of have to look at the situation you have and kind of like think about how you can change one landscape to suit the other?
Yeah, great question. I think that, hearing that we're going to shoot this in Australia, it's okay. That's challenging already just because I don't know what I'm dealing with.
Right.
I literally hadn't been to Australia before. So, um, you know, my immediate phone call is to Freddie Woff, my production designer, who I did Unhinged with, who, is a lifelong LAer. And like we got to go to Australia. We got to find some locations. We got to figure out what we can do. And one thing we did find pretty quickly was an area of the Gold Coast that we knew could play as Koreatown.
Mm.
Not the iconic LA that people know, but an LA that both of us know. And there was plenty of locations there that would play as Koreatown. So then, and that's the underbelly of LA, one of the underbellies of LA in a way that we thought would be really cool anyway to set this in. So we sort of embraced the situation and made it work. And then when it came to where Manka would live, we found an area around Burley Heads that's kind of reminded us of South Bay, Manhattan Beach area. So we made that work. And I think that, the challenges of the locations were pretty short-lived. I think we kind of solved those pretty quickly. The driving, on the other hand, was a little more difficult just because as we would say here, you guys drive on the wrong side of the road. You guys would say the same thing about us, but with the
Right.
cars driving the opposite sides of the road, there's a relatively decent amount of driving in the film, and
Yeah.
That presented sort of, I think, the biggest challenges of location by far were the driving scenes.
Yeah. Um, when it comes to Los Angeles in itself, like just in a industry kind of standard kind of question here, talked to so many filmmakers over the last 20 years, and the trend that I get more and more is that more, especially independent filmmakers, are moving out of Los Angeles because it's just so difficult to try to work there. It's really expensive. There's a lot of restrictions there. They look for other places as well. What's it going to take for LA to be kind of like the hotbed again? Or am I overinterpreting it? Is LA not in a bad place in regards to productions, and I'm just kind of overthinking it? Because it just seems to me that more people are getting out to shoot films other than where Dream Factory used to be the place to shoot films.
Yeah, I mean, you know, so my first film, The Joneses, was the first film to take advantage of the new tax incentive in Georgia 15 years ago. And as a result of that tax incentive, $9 billion a year are being brought into Georgia's economy. And it's become, Hollywood East basically because of these
Yep.
tax incentives. And I think that, as a result, you've got the infrastructure is built up there. You've got great crews there. Um, you know, I think a lot of where producers chase the tax incentives and they allow movies to get made that might not otherwise be made. So my point back to the LA question is, I think until LA or till the state of California can do something similar, I do think that this exodus is going to continue. I think that it feels like the meetings happen in LA or by Zoom at this point, really. But a lot of the companies are there. A lot of people are still living there that are making the movies happen. But I've never shot a film in LA.
Hmm.
It's 7 films. None of them have been in LA. None of them have been in California. Um, so it's that's one of those things where, whatever you have to do to make a movie, they're very hard to put together. And if you're going to get a great tax incentive, then that's going to make it a much more appealing place to shoot a movie. So, um, yeah, I don't know what's going to happen moving forward, but hopefully, the state of California will do something about it.
The Matt's Movie Reviews podcast is brought to you by Amazon Prime Video. One of the best on-demand streaming services available, Amazon Prime Video features exclusive Amazon originals as well as popular movies and TV shows. Watch Amazon Prime Video anytime, anywhere.
Speaking of LA-based movies, Point Break is mentioned quite a bit in his movie. The character that Nina Dobrev plays in the movie, she's just obsessed with the film. Like she wants to be, Patrick Swayze's Bodhi to like, Aaron Paul's Johnny Utah. That's like a whole thing with her in this movie. A question for you. Is there a movie that you are obsessed with? A movie that's always been on your mind that you like to bring up, that you like to research, something that always kind of like just is just your film that you like to always kind of dive into, maybe rewatch once in a while?
I mean, there's probably a couple. Angel Heart's always been one of my favorite films, and
Oh,
I've been
great
tried
film.
for a
Yeah.
long time to try to get the rights to the book to try to do a prequel of the Johnny Favorite story when he became famous and sold his soul and whatnot. But I heard they're doing a reboot of Angel Heart right now, which I'm kind of disappointed to hear because I would love to be involved with that.
Hmm.
That and I think Michael Mann's Manhunter is one of my all-time favorites as well. Those two were kind of key in, they came around at the time that I was, realizing you could be a filmmaker. Like some people actually could do this. I just didn't know as a kid that, oh, you can write and direct movies. Like just wasn't like a career that people were offering up in school or wherever, that you could have on your list of things to think about. And it was that period in late 80s with those films that really spoke to me in terms of kind of who I am today, as a filmmaker. And I think that I always go back to those films. There's others as well, but I'd say those are probably, two of the most important for me.
Fantastic films as well. I think Michael Mann just was at a recent re-screening of Manhunter in LA, I think. Yeah.
He was. In fact, my Freddie Woff, my production designer, went to it. I couldn't go, but I would love to go to it. I did go to a remastered screening in Hollywood of Angel Heart a couple years ago that was really cool to see on the big screen.
Yeah, Angel Heart will have its anniversary next year because that was an 87 film, so I can remember off the top of my head. Um,
Wow. Yeah.
yeah, that's a great film, great choice, and I think one of the great kind of unsung kind of movies of the 80s as well. So great choice there. Um, I got to ask just one more question about Russell because for me, he's like generational kind of talent. He always has been. What's his does it's kind of it's a weird word to bring up the word method because I don't know, everyone's got their own method, right? But what's a Russell Crowe like working with having done two very different performances with him? Is the approach towards both characters that he's done, one with Unhinged and one to Get Out, the same? Is the same kind of intensity, or does the type of character require a different type of approach to both? I'm really curious kind of about that, how he kind of works that way.
I mean, I think externally very similar. I don't know it's hard to know what
Of course.
he's processing interior, but I think, he asks a lot of questions. We dive pretty deeply into backstory. We, ask a lot of questions and he's the kind of guy that if he asks you a question, if you don't know the answer to it, you can't try to fake your way through it. You just have to
Mm.
say, I don't know, let's sit down and figure it out, because I think he can see through a lot of that. I think he definitely doesn't respond well to that. I think it's, you got to be able to say, I don't know, but you know what? We're here. That's what we're here for. Let's figure this out. Let's dive into this guy's backstory. Let's dive into what got him here. Let's dive into what is causing these decisions he's making in this particular scene. I think that he does a lot of that kind of work. And as a result, I think you know, when you call action, the switch turns on, and when you call cut, the switch turns off, and he's cracking jokes after. I mean, I'll never forget it. The scene in the diner in Unhinged where he brutally murders Jimmy Simpson with a butter knife. I'm standing around the corner where he exits the diner with my monitor right there, and really pretty much the moment he's off camera, I'm standing there. And this brutal, intense scene. And as he walks off, he's like cracking jokes to me right
Mm.
when he's off camera. And it's like he's able to really turn it on and off in that way that like unlike anyone I've ever seen before.
So no talking in Albanian accents like during lunch hour.
I did not witness any of that, that's for sure.
Well, it's a fantastic performance from him, and it's so great to be able to see Russell kind of like tap into that part of him again, which we don't see enough of on screen as well. Because like yourself, I believe that he has great comedic talents, and I think he really kind of plays it really well in movies beforehand, and especially to Get Out. For everyone out there listening, June 26th in select cinemas in the US. Now, I know there's a June 30th digital and on-demand release. I encourage everyone to watch this film in theaters. It's important that we get people in cinemas, in theaters to watch these movies. These are the movies that need to be watched in theaters, so we get more of them made. I'm a big kind of advocate for people to watch indie films, for mid-budget films as well, because those are the films that I think is that makes that stirs the drink or what is Hollywood in the film industry. And Derrick Borte, thank you so very much for your time today. Congratulations with the film. And I hope we get to talk again in the future. Who knows? Maybe next year I can get in touch. We could talk some Angel Heart, and then do a
Yeah,
deep
man.
dive in that.
Yeah. I'm so stoked to be episode 671. So maybe, 702, 702, maybe there's some other, we'll pick a number down the road and I'll be happy to come back anytime.
Thank you for watching the Matt's Movie Reviews channel. Please subscribe for more reviews, podcast interviews, and exclusive content.